Morning Lifestyle with Dave on this Wednesday morning. Now, we're looking at the situation of COVID and how it's affected Australians with disabilities and how they're struggling at times to get the support they need. River Knight is the CEO of Australian Communities and he's joining us. River, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about this particular problem, how it eventuates, and what does it mean for those who are suffering with disabilities?
So in Australia, we've got about 4 million people living with a disability, which is about 18% of the population, and 1 in 10 of those accesses what we call the National Disability Insurance Scheme. What we've seen is a 30% underspend of funding in that area. So people have really experienced a disconnect, with about 100,000 finding that essential services were unavailable or cancelled during that big COVID pandemic through 2020, and we're slowly getting back to it now.
So what do people with disabilities do when all of a sudden the support that they desperately need is not there?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of those supports just can't stop. So service providers have to still somehow deliver a service because some of those more extreme end of the scenario participants where they need staff to help them with showering, getting up in the morning, food, household tasks, appointments, all those sorts of things, they simply can't go without services. So if they don't have services in place, unfortunately they end up in hospital.
So what are we going to do going forward in this space? Because as we've seen this week particularly, Western Australia just shuts down everything straight away and nothing happens for 5 days. Does that automatically affect the disabilities sector, or is there a sort of a degree of flexibility to do the jobs that need to be done?
What tends to happen when we have a lockdown is we have those community access services where staff come in and support someone to get out in their community, do their shopping, go to their appointments, all those kind of things that are really essential that we sort of take for granted. A lot of them can't happen. We still need to provide those services, but you've also got to consider the staff that are providing those services are also experiencing that lockdown and have to make sure that they stay healthy so they don't bring that to the participants they're supporting. So unfortunately what happens is that lockdown affects people's mental health, their trauma, and when you've got a mental illness as well as a disability, it's a really long road to connect back again with your community, which is why we're doing all the expos around Australia that we're doing.
Now, the NDIS funding, does it need to be increased?
Well, what we've seen is a 30% underspend in a lot of people's NDIS plans. So what tends to happen with that is it doesn't roll over to the next year. It's a use it or lose it approach. So a lot of people have not spent the funding that they really needed to spend on really essential services. But what we're hoping is NDIS will use that unspent funds when we've got a $22 billion a year potential service. There should be a little bit of cash flowing around there to help service providers really get back into the swing of things.
What sort of advice do you have for people who are unsure how to navigate the scheme and connect with service providers?
What we find the best way to connect is to come to those community events in places where they can see people face-to-face COVID willing. So those expos that we're running, for example, our big one in Brisbane coming up in May, and the other ones around the country, are really important for people to be able to actually reconnect, because there's 15,000 service providers are registered in Australia, which is a huge list to try and navigate. And it's a difficult system to try and navigate. So what we're finding is if we can do those expos, and they can go and find out about them at dacommunities.com and connect again with the community.
So for Tasmanians who want to know a little bit more about the disability service providers, or indeed how the actual system works, what's the best place to go?
Well, NDIS itself has a great website that has a lot of information on there, and we try to provide updates regularly around Australia and the sector through our website at dacommunities.com.
Well, River, we thank you very much for taking some time to join us on our program and explain this very difficult issue that we've experienced throughout COVID-19, and we hope that things start again to settle down soon. And it's been wonderful to spend some time with you learning a little bit more about it.
Thank you for having me.